Hello, and welcome to another episode of Global Tantrum. I'm your host, Steve Pally. With me, as per usual, is my co host, Professor Galen Jackson. And joining us, especially from an undisclosed location, is our friend and friend of the show, Professor Andrew Lieber. We are here to discuss peace in the Middle East. Andrew can only join for a short while. I should peace in the Middle East. I'm joking. We hope it's peace in the Middle East. We're not sure. There's so much to dig into there, but we're actually going to front load this while we have Andrew and ask him what is going on in the Gulf monarchies as a result of everything that has happened. The last I read was that the Gulf monarchies were urging Trump to continue the war and finish the job. That
Mhm.
seems not to be happening anymore. The US has called a 2 week ceasefire with the Iranians, and the Iranians seem to have the whip hand at the moment. We'll get into that more. But are the Gulf monarchies happy about this? Are they dismayed? What are they saying? What are they going to do? Galen and I don't know. So we're really glad to have you for at least a short while to discuss.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'll try to be quick just because circumstances are a little unsteady here. But yeah, so briefly, a lot of ambiguous messaging from the Gulf states in a couple of previous weeks, like reaching truly extraordinary levels to the point where I was told, like, third hand, that Saudi officials were telling Trump to finish the job, but that by finish
Mm,
the job, they included the idea of finishing the job diplomatically, to which I said, that's not the customary understanding of the term finish the job in the United States. So they may, I assume, but he looked better cultural competency to talk through that one. But yeah, in terms of the reactions to the ceasefire, there was a little bit of unsteadiness for the the first 24 hours because Iranian drones and missiles kind of kept coming in,
right.
including hitting the pipeline that Saudi Arabia was using to keep getting oil out through the Red Sea. Maybe just like a kind of parting thing to tell them, hey, by the way, we can still hit this stuff. But as of now, things seem to be kind of splitting in directions similar to the divisions we talked about the last time I was on this show. Hopefully, I'm not getting too trapped into just repeating my own analysis, but like the Sultanate of Oman welcomed these developments and also condemned Israeli attacks on Lebanon that, at least at the time I left for this undisclosed location, seemed like they might be threatening a ceasefire. Saudi Arabia kind of welcomed events and highlighted its own somewhat minor role in bringing about current fire by reaching out to Pakistan to help with
Okay.
mediation. And then the United Arab Emirates kind of condemned the whole thing as, well, I mean, obviously welcomed a ceasefire, but deeply questioned whether that ceasefire would hold, and also has continued to point out that the Strait of Hormuz remains rather closed.
Yes.
So more to come.
More to come. Yeah. And the details of the fighting seems to have stopped everywhere except for Lebanon, to your point, at least temporarily. And right before going on air, Galen, you mentioned that the news is that Israel has agreed to negotiate with Lebanon,
Government, but it
the
will continue
government.
to strike Hezbollah.
Okay, this is one of the conditions. The Iranians have promulgated a 10-point plan for conditions for the ceasefire. Trump has said this is a acceptable basis for negotiation, but there's a lot of stuff in that 10 points that are like patently unacceptable to the United States and certainly to Israel, including some control of the Strait of Hormuz, the ability to charge tolls for the Iranians, the preservation of its regional militias, including Hezbollah, the right to enrich uranium. It's all the stuff that we don't want them to do, basically. And I'm sure the Gulf monarchies also don't want them to do any of that stuff. In particular, like govern who gets access to the Strait of Hormuz, right, Andrew? So like seeing that, how are they reacting to the prospect of negotiations? And are they going to try to secure some kind of outcome somehow?
Yeah, it's kind of unclear in that I think openly every Gulf monarchy says that that is unacceptable, with the possible exception of Oman. Oman got named in one version of the 10 points as like
Right.
co-administering the tolls. Then everything is very unclear. A minister of transportation for Oman said that they couldn't do that under international law, but it's also not clear if he like understood the importance of what he was saying in like kind of a closed door meeting with some Omani legislators. So that's a little up in the air. But as I wrote about in a recent thing I just found for Carnegie, like there is precedent for just paying things under the table and pretend you're not paying people stuff. Like I'm sure Saudi Arabia has been paying Houthi forces quite a lot
Right.
to help incentivize Houthis to not get involved in this fighting, which they haven't. So I think that outwardly there'll be a lot of statements so like, oh, any kind of payment is unacceptable. This is like a violation of international law and whatnot. But in the scenes, I'm sure different countries are calculating, well, if it can lock things in, how much would we be willing to pay to ensure we can get the same amount of oil out with a slight tax on it rather than like nothing? So probably, I think even the UAE eventually condemned the attacks on Lebanon, which I think is a suggestion that right now they value some kind of tenuous ceasefire in the Gulf over just kind of like finishing the job for real, but probably now view this as an opportunity to, view this as an opportunity to try to lobby the United States for more favorable terms. My concern in that direction, not that I work for them, but is that they haven't really demonstrated much ability to force the United States to do much up until now or deter Iran from doing much up until now. So I'm kind of skeptical they're going to be able to get a seat at the table for these negotiations, the way a lot of commentators from the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait are demanding to no one in particular online right now.
Right. Well, they didn't have a seat at like the war planning or the war other than being like bystanders that were getting shot at and like semi-defended, right? So it doesn't surprise me that much that like, they weren't participants other than as targets. And yeah, we talked about whether or not they would participate. They ended up kind of not participating, although it seemed like we were getting close there towards the end.
I'm a little surprised, I guess, that I had thought that maybe the United Arab Emirates might get involved like right towards the end, but I think speaks to the extent to which this was kind of a surprise for everybody. Like I think if the UAE knew that like at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday, the conflict will come to an end, they might have tried to like do something in the last minute. And there is some speculation right now about some last minute strikes on oil facilities inside Iran who did that. But as of now, it doesn't seem like they got involved in any meaningful sense.
Yeah, got it. And I guess the other piece of this is whether they actually believed that the United States or Israel or both of them acting together could quote unquote finish the job at this point, because it sure seemed like they couldn't, barring like even
Ground
more
troops.
even more explosive methods, right? So they probably saw the writing on the wall to a certain extent. And
I think it'll be interesting because the fact that the United States has now opted for this 2-week delay, I mean, I think it's pretty frost. If I had to put my money in one direction, I would put it towards like things kicking off again
yeah,
in the 2 week span. But it'll be interesting to see what the beliefs are now, because I think the thinking was, oh, well, there's always more that Trump can escalate, and they're finally going to do like the magic thing that will escalate enough to force Iran to back down. And now that the U.S. position is like, yeah, it seems like we've done enough. Like, why don't we just discuss some terms anyway? Good luck, everybody. I think these states are kind of seeing, oh, the thing that we didn't want to happen, that Iran knows it can exercise leverage over the strait. And we're just going to be kind of left here. Now that that's sinking in as a reality, it'll be interesting to see how calculations shift in maybe the next 2-3 weeks.
yeah. And I know you don't have a ton of time left, but I guess my last question for you while we still have you would be, do you think that those strategic calculations, I mean, obviously so much remains in flight as far as the terms of the ceasefire, whether the ceasefire lasts, which is a really good question and a great point that we'll get into. Are they starting to think about the post-settlement world and whether it makes sense to make their bed solely with the United States anymore, given what's happened?
So I haven't seen a ton of thinking on that. I think there's been pretty uniform sense that like American technology works pretty good at shooting things down, maybe add on some Ukrainian technology as well. But also these kind of shifts are going to take some time. Like now people trace back the 2023 rapprochement between Saudi and Iran to the 2019 Iran-linked tax on Saudi oil facilities. So that took kind of like 4 years of thinking things over. Admittedly, there was like a global pandemic in between. Sorry, a little bit there, but I'll kind of leave it at that. So it may take some time.
Yeah, got it. Galen, you have any questions for Andrew? Last question.
Yeah. I mean, my only question is, this seems like their worst case scenario in some ways, with even though one of the terms of the ceasefire supposedly was Iran opening the strait. It very much seems that open means something different to Iran at the moment, and it now has quite a bit of leverage in the area. How do you think the Gulf states are going to respond to that? Are they just going to try to build a lot more pipelines to circumvent the Gulf? Do you think they are going to try to cozy up to Tehran in order to avoid being punished by them? Or do you think that the reaction will be something else entirely?
I think that, it also depends on the time frame. I think right now they've kind of made their bet on, well, we can't they try to stand away from this for a little bit. Sorry.
It's all
If
good.
I can get away from a loudspeaker briefly, but I think that they've made it pretty clear that that they're not willing to anger the United States. I don't think they're going to try to disrupt this ceasefire exactly. But I think that probably they're going to focus on getting oil out of the way. So like you said, more gas and oil pipelines. One piece I'm working on with a friend now is trying to think about what the range of scenarios are. So yeah, a best case scenario, GCC agrees that okay, energy security is part of our national security. We may disagree on many other things, but we should probably have a coordinated oil transportation network as part of deterring Iran, not through military capacity, but through just demonstrating that it's not going to have the kind of economic damage people think. I'm a little skeptical that will go through. And I think that just a lot of goodwill has been burned such that these countries might be willing to have kind of back channel discussions with Iran to try to get things to a minimal level of acceptance, but it's going to be very hard to do kind of public signing ceremonies. So probably there'll be a rush to pretend that everything is fine while behind the channels, they're just kind of behind the scenes, they're barely just kind of holding things together. So yeah, I'm sorry for the announcements there, but hopefully that
that's
gets
okay.
at it.
You came through loud and clear, and it's kind of what we expected, which is these guys are still suspended between a rock and a hard place. It's pretty much, and they're
Almost literally.
yeah, and
exactly. Rock into straight, yeah,
two straits.
Yeah. I could imagine them figuring something out, but kind of the whole theory of the case was we'll hold out the carrot of potential economic growth with Iran, and that'll be enough to keep them happy. That didn't work, and kind of Iran and the Gulf states will know that going into any discussion. But as we kind of talked about earlier, everyone is even getting to the point where they're at the table to be part of any negotiations rather than just trying to kind of keep the United States and Iran happy at the sidelines of the real discussions.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a bad situation to be in. It's kind of the worst of both worlds, given that they didn't necessarily want this to start in the first place, and now it's ended in a worse position for them, seemingly. Awesome. Well, I know that you probably need to exit your secret location, so we'll go ahead and let you go for now.
Yeah, no. Well, thanks for having me on. Thanks for putting up with the airport announcements here, but the rest of the episode in that kitchen.
Awesome.
Thanks, man.
Thanks. Talk soon. Okay.
Well, unfortunately, I think as bad a news as he's reporting, I think it's only getting it worse for the rest of the pod.
Yeah.
Look, so we should probably update people on what the present state of affairs seems to be with this ceasefire.
Let's do that.
Trump, of course, issued two of just the wildest, declarations a U.S. president ever has.
Maybe I think they take number one and number two personally.
It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
I had to quote it in front of my class. Open the fucking strait, you crazy bastards. I know it's a podcast and we can swear if we want to, but in this case, I'm just quoting the White House.
We generally don't swear, but yeah, this is in the public record.
Yeah. So that was wild. And then the next day, a whole civilization will die tonight unless they meet my demands.
Did you interpret that as a nuclear threat? I did not personally.
I did not when I saw it. And then later in the day, as I was thinking about it, I did at least wonder. I did not interpret it that way. I still don't, but I suppose it's open to interpretation.
Some people did. Nate Silver wrote a whole piece about a nuclear coercion. because he was like, oh, wow, that's a clear nuclear threat.
So just as like a pet project of mine, it drives me crazy when people who study nuclear issues build these data sets and
Right.
come up with examples of nuclear threats where I'm like, that was not a nuclear threat and the nuclear issue wasn't even really relevant here. In this case, I would, if someone wanted to make the claim, I would probably concede the point. I think that
Really?
is, well, at least it is a reasonable interpretation. As a matter of policy, I don't try to get inside that guy's head.
Yeah, I guess it's not that far away from what Putin said early on in the Ukraine war. But like it wasn't like 1973 when Nixon took us to DEFCON 3, right? That's a very clear signal.
Yeah, I actually kind of don't agree that was a nuclear threat.
Okay.
And it wasn't really Nixon because he was, I think the language that was used was too distraught, which was code
hammered.
for hammered. So
Fair enough.
Kissinger was really running the show. Anyway, if we want to talk 73, I have a couple of books on the topic. So we can do that another time.
Yeah, sorry to get us off track.
No, it's anyway, like I could see how someone might reach that conclusion. But in any case, my first reaction when I heard the news that there had been a ceasefire was, oh, wow, this must have been, to my great surprise, a case of successful coercion. And per your point, potentially nuclear coercion. Now that I see what the actual state of affairs is, that does not seem to be the case at all.
Mhm.
It was not Iran backing down to Trump's threats or, as several U.S. officials, especially Pete Hegseth, are saying, this is the most incredible battlefield performance of all time and we've achieved all of our objectives. I think that's largely incorrect.
Oh, yeah.
My interpretation is largely what you have shared as yours, which is Iran has agreed to this because they get the shooting stopped and they still largely have command of the strait.
Mhm.
And so they still maintain their leverage and they are no longer getting bombed. And the assassination campaign seems to have paused for the moment. And I think they know that Trump really does not want the shooting to have to restart because he is running out of options.
He's complete. Yeah, I other than going to ground operations, which we agree he really doesn't want to do.
Or point, I guess, since you mentioned it, we could be talking nuclear options, but he really doesn't want to do that either.
No, he definitely doesn't. But then you look at what's in Iran's 10-point plan, right? And there's a lot of stuff in there that is like manifestly unacceptable to the United States. Let's go to the tape. We've got the lifting of all primary and secondary sanctions on Iran, continued Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz, U.S. military withdrawal from the Middle East, an end to attacks on Iran and its allies, including Hezbollah and the Houthis and so on, the release of frozen Iranian assets, and a UN Security Council resolution making any deal binding. Also on that list is the ability to enrich uranium, by the way. And so we had a deal where they could not enrich uranium. And that was something that Iran agreed to. But it seems like given
which you're talking JCPOA?
JCPOA, yeah.
No, they could enrich uranium. They just couldn't enrich it past 3.7%.
You're quite right. I was thinking weapons grade.
Yeah,
weapons grade. And actually, it's not clear in the reporting what specifically they're asking for in terms of enrichment. It just says enrichment. This is a list of maximalist demands, which again is kind of what I'd expect given the state of the war and where they stand at the outset of negotiations, which is holding the whip hand and also control of the Strait of Hormuz. And yeah, the understanding is like they've started letting some shipping through, but it needs to be coordinated with the Iranian military. And interestingly, they are charging tolls. And those tolls are not in US dollars. They are in Chinese yuan or Bitcoin or gold, but anything other than dollars, this is kind of a big deal. It presages the wholesale assault on the petrodollar system, which is a big part of US financial hegemony. And so, yeah, like to me, this reads as we won this war. We need you to acknowledge that we won this war. They might be willing to negotiate on some of these points, right? Because I do think, and we have been saying Like, it's not clear to us what's happening inside of Iran, but it does seem to me like they got sick of getting assassinated, which is reasonable, right? It's the United States and Israel were trying to kill their way out of this. And I do think that at a certain point, that does start to apply psychological pressure. But at this point, it was kind of like, why not pause and see what we can get?
Especially since they haven't really had to give much up. I mean,
No.
You made the key point, which was Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi. That was the language he used. The strait will be opened in coordination with Iran's armed forces.
Yes.
Which is a clear effort to set a precedent that the Strait of Hormuz is under Iranian control. And as of now, it still is. The number of ships passing through is still very small.
It's sub 10% what it was.
Yes, absolutely. I think actually yesterday or today, I can't remember the number of ships that passed went down. It was only about 5 ships, something like that. I want to be careful I'll preface this for the rest of the conversation. I think this is a big deal, but there are some people who I think are taking claims too far. Okay. So for example, Bob Pape at the University of Chicago, who you took classes with as well there?
I did.
With him?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So he wrote an article in the New York Times saying the war was turning Iran into a global power, like a fourth pole of power alongside Russia, China, the United States. That strikes me as exaggerated. They are a regional power.
Yep.
And their position has been, at least in power political terms, I would argue, strengthened as a result of the war. And the war has been counterproductive to U.S. and Israeli interests. But that's a very different claim than saying that they are now a world power.
That's a provocative claim. Yeah. Plus, the basis of their power is temporary. And we can get into that a little bit later.
And we will. And then the other piece here, you're mentioning that this is a clear effort at de-dollarization, and you sent me a really good article, which admittedly I had to read quickly. But we had our friend Ryan Weldzius on
a while ago, last year,
a million years ago.
About tariffs.
Yes, but he detailed some of the reasons why it would be difficult to, assault the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency, and it still has some real advantages. But this is clearly an effort to chip away at that dominance and will certainly negatively impact the dollar's status. I'm a little reluctant to say, the days of the dollar are doomed now.
No, but it's death by 1,000 cuts, right?
Well, and the other thing that's key here, leaving aside the reserve status, is that they are charging tolls in Chinese currency. That makes it even easier for them to evade U.S. sanctions, which are based on the U.S. weaponizing the dollar.
That's right.
That works for China, that works for Iran, and it does, as you said, force the world away from the petrodollar system to at least some degree. All of that said, this is a big deal. And I am not going as far as some analysts in saying, the United States is now Britain in 1956 as a result of the Suez Crisis, and that it is no longer a world power. It remains, arguably the strongest power. I already thought we had moved into a multipolar or bipolar system. I think this marks the official, full-on entry into that system, if for no other reason because of the reputational damage this has done to the United States.
Tremendous reputational damage. It exercised tremendous military capability and demonstrated that it retains tremendous military capability, but it was not able to satisfy its objectives during the course of this war. The 3 objectives were: get rid of the regime, open the Strait of Hormuz, protect its allies.
Can I add that we've been talking about that? Sorry to interrupt, but we've been talking about those 3s as during the war.
That's right.
But the strategic objective above all that you could justify the war on was making sure Iran doesn't get nuclear weapons.
That was a 4th. Yeah.
And I think we both agree it is now more likely that Iran will become a nuclear power. And as a result of the war, Iran's bargaining position has improved because of its ability to close the strait and threaten its neighbors, as you said.
Yeah, and they've proven the ability to do it under extreme duress, right? It didn't actually it took the willingness to take a lot of pain, which they demonstrated, but they fought like an asymmetric campaign, and it worked against the superpower. It worked. The United States was not able to accomplish its strategic goals in this war. Period. Full stop. It was not able to bring about regime change. Trump has said the regime has changed. We're dealing with much more reasonable people now. It's the opposite. We're dealing with hardliners now, less reasonable people. You and I both thought that was the likely outcome, and here we are, right? It was not able to protect its client states where it has military bases and interceptors. It got achieved 95% coverage, but that's not good enough, as it turns out. Like, you need to be able to stop these things comprehensively, and it's just too hard. Iran proved that it's just too hard. And they were able to inflict pain on the United States clients in the Gulf. And finally, like, they were not able, maybe they were about to prepare a naval operation to seize Carr Island or, attack the islands in the Strait or something like that. The Marines were getting ready to do something. But it's pretty clear Trump didn't want to. And it remains to be seen how long this ceasefire will last, whether it will result in an enduring deal. But the U.S. Navy did not establish a convoy system. It was not able to establish like an alternative insurance for shippers that would cause shippers to want to get tankers through the strait while this was happening. It wasn't able to do any of those things. And so it's kind of like if in the 90s we had gone after Saddam and he basically fought us to a standstill and ended up in control of Kuwait. It's kind of how I think about it. It's like we tried it again. And
that's an interesting way of putting it. I think we both agree that it probably would have been worse if Trump made good on his threats. He ran out of options.
Yep.
Short of ordering ground forces in, which, I highly recommend A Peace in Foreign Affairs by Steve Biddle and Dick Betts that was written maybe 2 weeks ago, where, they make a number of good points, but one of them is, look, even if you achieve your objectives, if you achieve them at too high of a cost, then it's still not a strategic win if it's a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah.
And I think ordering ground troops into Iran, even if ultimately, you collapse the government, would have been extraordinarily costly, and there's no guarantee that replaces it.
Yeah.
Would have been better.
With the Israelis, we struck 13,000 plus targets.
Yeah.
But in fact, the metric that actually mattered was Trump's approval rating, which went from the low 40s to the high 30s.
So
over the course of this war.
Yeah. And I do think it is correct to say that one of the key asymmetries here is which side can bear more pain. Okay.
Yeah. And we've been saying that. Yeah.
Iran is willing to bear enormous pain. I actually think the Israelis are willing to bear quite a bit of pain. The United States, I'm not going to flat out say the United States is not willing to bear pain, but Americans will only bear pain if they think that it is actually worth it. Yeah. And I think many Americans don't see the strategic logic as being compelling enough in this case.
So if I'm a member of the American public, I'm asking the following questions. Did Iran attack us? No. Was Iran going to attack us? Almost definitely not. Were they attacking the Israelis? Yes. Do I care about that? Depends who I am, but probably as a secondary or tertiary factor.
But also, was there a diplomatic way to get something that takes care of the issue? It seems like maybe there was.
Well, we already had it.
Well, yes. Leaving that aside for a moment, yes. But, I think we will get more details on the Witkoff-Kushner-led negotiations prior to February 28th at some point. But the details we have now suggest that, maybe there was a window for some sort of.
Oh, yeah. Prior, like when we attacked them during negotiations for the second time.
For the second time.
For the second time. And now we're in negotiations for the third time.
Yeah.
And it raised a lot of questions about how those negotiations are going to go.
I want to talk about how I've had some interesting discussions with colleagues recently where, getting criticized for not having enough ideas of how to get out of this. And I'm like, I didn't want to do this in the first place. I didn't want to
get out of it.
But no,
don't start it.
I take their point though. It's like, if you're an advisor to the White House right now, here we are. like we
Yeah.
do need to talk about what the best ways out of this are. So I have a couple ideas on that. But
Yeah.
before we get to that, I do want to ask you, and I got into kind of a deep dive yesterday, which threw me off all of my main priorities at work. Like Iran is getting roughly 2 million barrels of oil a day through the strait, give or
Yeah.
take. Correct?
Mhm.
Okay. It is still unclear to me why the United States doesn't interdict those ships. And I understand that that would further tighten global supply.
Yep.
And maybe there are ways to compensate for part of that.
We talked
But-
about this. Yeah.
Yeah, but like, do you think it's because the concern is that will spike the price of oil globally somewhat more? Or is it mainly that if the United States does that, Iran is holding its neighbor sites hostage and could escalate?
Those are both big factors. There's a third factor, which is where those barrels were going. They were going to China. And the Chinese are well positioned to weather this type of shock. They have between 3 and 4 months worth of oil socked away in their strategic reserve. So they were not panicking, but they would not like to see 2 million barrels of oil vanish from their imports. They're still pretty import dependent. We know that the Chinese have a coercive lever that works on the United States. They used it last year. It was shutting off the supply of rare earths, which we need for advanced technology and in particular, military technology. All of the advanced missiles and planes and weapon systems that we use, including the interceptors during the course of this war, and need to replenish now in the worst possible way.
And any number of other, important consumer products as well.
Yeah.
That's a good point. So, I mean, we are now seeing, and by the way, like, I just want to emphasize again, and I'm not trying to just like gloat about being right. It's just infuriating that this
Feels
many
good, right?
people- No, it actually doesn't. It's just like people warned about all these things. And it has now been confirmed by a New York Times article that was published a few days ago on Trump's path to war, that it was abundantly made clear that like, hey, if this happens, Iran could close the Strait of Hormuz and it would be very difficult to reopen.
Yeah.
And he said, no, by then they'll have capitulated. People have been warning for a long time, as we talked about on a previous episode. If you want to weaponize interdependence, other countries will have an incentive to find ways to weaponize it back. And that is essentially what China is doing. I took your point on China, by the way, when we were talking before recording. I think that's a good way of putting it. You said China's taking like an 80-20 outcome here. Like part of me was confused, since we now know that they were a factor in getting Iran to agree to the ceasefire.
Yep.
Part of
There's
me was
reporting
yeah.
around that.
Part of me was a little puzzled as to why China would want that stopped. And aside from your point on, they're getting oil from the area, I think they come out of this in a good position, especially if Iran is going to levy tolls in yuan rather than in dollars.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the point I was making was that they have achieved like the low-hanging fruit of the United States losing strategically, being seen globally to lose strategically, irregardless of what the Trump administration is saying. I think that the entire world is seeing this as a major strategic loss in not in favor of the United States. And this was bad for business. So the Chinese were willing to pocket the win and move on and stabilize the situation. They operated through Pakistan, apparently. They have good relationships with the Pakistanis, and apparently also, they talked with the US, they talked with Iran, and they brought the parties together. I guess in Islamabad, right? That's where everybody's meeting.
On Saturday, and I
Yeah.
think the U.S. delegation is going to be led by J.D. Vance.
JD is coming out with Witkoff and Kushner, the dynamic duo of diplomacy in the Trump pantheon, right? Now it's the Three Musketeers. We'll see what they can get done. Yeah, the question to me now becomes, well, like, how far is Iran willing to push this? And what are they going to try to go for? Are they going to try to grab the brass ring and like get most or all of their demands? Like, there's some things that they're just not going to get, right? But they could probably make out pretty well. Trump was talking about like sharing tolls through the Strait of Hormuz and like all this crazy stuff. Yeah, I see you shaking your head. It's like, that seems like nonsense. There's another factor here, which is the Israelis and what they're going to do. And my question for you is, they probably don't want this war to stop for that long.
They definitely don't. And
Yeah.
the reporting indicates that they were told at the last minute that Trump was going to agree to the ceasefire.
Mhm.
And Netanyahu was not happy about that. And he does
I'm
not
sure.
want to stop the war in Lebanon. And so, as we've said from the beginning, U.S. and Israeli war aims inevitably were going to diverge. And here we are.
Here we are. But I guess my question for you is, are they going to like keep hitting Hezbollah? And if they keep hitting Hezbollah, like I'm like 90% sure they will, I suppose Trump could apply real leverage and
Yeah.
arm twisting and be like, you have to stop now. And then they would probably stop. But it's not clear to me that they're going to do that unless he actually does that.
I
And he
agree.
would, yeah. And he would need a reason to do that. He would need to trade that for something else that the Iranians give up,
Well,
right?
so now this gets to one of the key questions, which is, you said, and I tend to agree, that Trump really should not want the shooting to start again. Okay.
No.
Now, maybe we're wrong about that, but that seems to be correct to me. I imagine Iran knows that, since the ceasefire was agreed to in the first place, and
Yep.
people are describing this as another taco moment.
Yep.
If that's the case, I guess here's where things point in different directions. On the one hand, I'm not sure that the war continuing in Lebanon is something that the Iranians want to upset the ceasefire, given that their position has been pretty good for now.
It's not clear that the Israelis can accomplish what they want in Lebanon
Well,
anyway, right?
Totally. But
Yeah.
that, leaving that aside, I agree with that. Just like Hamas still exists. And
Exactly.
Hezbollah is a much more powerful organization, frankly. So on the one hand, I'm not sure Iran wants to press on that terribly strong, since they've already achieved quite a bit. On the other hand, if they know that Trump cannot afford to get the shooting resumed, then that gives them leverage to tell him, look, tell the Israelis to knock it off, or we're recommencing with the war.
Yeah.
And that's a lever that they could pull on. And I do agree with you that if Trump decides, okay, this is too risky for American interests, he will be comfortable pressing the prime minister to knock it off in Lebanon. That might be a little more difficult than it has been in the past when it comes to U.S.-Israeli relations, just because, frankly, the size and scale of Israel's operations in Lebanon right now are quite significant.
Yeah.
But if it's a matter of just the shooting stops, not a territorial withdrawal at this moment, I think that's probably feasible.
Yeah. So I think we can both squint and see some overlap in the bargaining positions here. The Israeli factor complicates things, but the U.S. I think, has enough control over that situation to be able to finesse something, maybe. I don't know. There's a ton of unanswered questions. If you had to put a percentage on it right now today, what is the percentage chance that this ceasefire ends up in an enduring agreement that lasts some period of time?
Yeah.
Can you put a percentage on it?
It's
hard.
I mean, I can. I don't know how
Yeah.
accurate it will be.
Yeah.
It's a great question. Talking to you has changed my opinion somewhat. I was going to go lower just because, it's not off to a terribly great start. But I do think it is correct to say that Trump really does not want the war to recommence.
Now, as soon as it does, he'll lose more popularity pretty much immediately.
Well, and potentially more leverage, and potentially there will be even greater pressure to escalate, which I think he
Still doesn't
probably
want to do.
calculates that he can't do.
His threats were so outlandish that I read them and I was like, that's ridiculous.
See, I actually didn't. I was very much expecting what did he say? Bridge and power plant.
And power plants, yeah.
Yeah, I actually was expecting that to happen.
Okay.
Just because I thought the temptation to try to, gamble for resurrection or
Right.
double down on bad bets would be significant enough. But
Gamble for resurrection. I love that term so much. It's so good. Yeah.
So yeah, I think I would probably put them at 2-1 that it
Okay.
holds, but
Okay.
at like great disadvantage to the United States
Yeah.
compared to the status quo ante,
Yeah.
which is to say Iran's going to be making money going through the strait. And
So I
aside from the reputational damage in terms of credibility, I think for the president to threaten killing an entire civilization has not been a great look for the United States.
it's a terrible look, but like for somebody like who's just coming at it very analytically, it was so over the top that I found it incredible personally. But I can understand why people would react the way they did. Democrats in Congress, I think, they're trying to get him removed via the 25th Amendment.
There's no chance that
there's no chance, obviously, but like, yeah, it was not a good look. It's one of many bad looks coming out of the United States. But
yeah.
anyway, I would put it a little higher than that.
Oh, interesting.
I'm
That
gonna
it holds.
Yes, I'm going to say 75% because I think the Chinese are also motivated to put a stop to this. And China has leverage everywhere. They have rare earths on us. They are the main buyer of Iranian everything. They've got relationships in the Gulf. And if they can play a role in putting this to bed and be seen playing that role, that's another feather in China's cap.
Well,
And
we are now seeing polls that China has a higher approval rating internationally than the United States.
oh, whoops. Yeah. And that hat has grown feathers as a result of this. And yeah, if they can put this to bed and send the children home, right? And be the adult in the room and be seen doing that. And I think they have like leverage over all sides. That's an even bigger win for them.
Yeah.
So
all right. I did want to briefly, I know we're pressed for time.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. Any last thoughts or?
Well, I just like, I read I recommend it also in Foreign Affairs by Daniel Chartle and Samuel Helfont, I think, who have both kind of studied the post 1991 state of affairs in the Persian Gulf.
Mm.
And, the key criticism, which they're not by any means the first people to make of U.S. policy, which was called dual containment. Previously, the United States tried to balance Iran and Iraq against one another. The U.S. was going to contain both of them. The key criticism they make is, yes, Saddam Hussein, really bad guy, not a trustworthy guy, gave him no incentive to alter Iraqi policy because U.S. policy was, we don't care what your policy is. Our policy is regime change, which
Getting rid of you. Yeah.
so like he
No
famously
outs.
said,
Yeah.
says at one point, hey, we can have sanctions with inspectors or sanctions without inspectors, right?
Yeah.
And so they make this argument, U.S. shouldn't make the same mistakes here with Iran. And what they should do is basically welcome the normalized relations, welcome Iran as a key player in the Middle East, and stop neurosing about the regime in Tehran, and in exchange get assurances from Iran that it won't build nuclear weapons. Leaving aside for a second, like the Iranians feel they have been burned by past negotiations with the United States. My question for you is that even possible? Like, are the Iranians at all interested in that sort of negotiation at this point? Even if, in theory, the United States could credibly pledge
Yeah.
to ever again. Yeah.
That's one issue. Another issue is, of course, Israel.
I'm saying for the sake of
Yeah.
argument, like, let's say you could get past those barriers.
Okay.
Like, do the Iranians, do they have an interest in taking that deal at this point? I'm not sure that they would.
I don't know. I mean, I think one factor is the revenge factor, given that people in charge are probably pretty pissed off. Maybe after a change of administration or something like that, it might be more possible. But yeah, if we assume that those two problems are somehow resolved satisfactorily, like the ball is in Iran's court. And if they get enough stuff, then yes, I don't see why not. I think, that's kind of what they've wanted all along. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to export the revolution while being a member in good standing of the community of nations and not sanctioned, while also being the regional hegemon. So it's like, yeah, why wouldn't they under those circumstances? The question is, would they behave responsibly, quote unquote, responsibly as a result of this?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the missing half of it, right? From that analysis. It's like, okay, yeah, we can welcome them in and give them whatever they want. It's like, are they going to stop doing all the malign stuff they've been doing? It's like, no, probably not, right?
Yeah, which it is worth repeating. Like, it's not like this wasn't a problem. And
Yeah.
it's not like Iran's policies were not threatening to their neighbors. And,
It was a big problem for a
Yes.
long time.
And I do put a lot of blame on them for, leading up to this moment. That doesn't mean going to war with them was the correct answer.
It was not. Yeah. We got to leave
but-
it there for this
yeah.
week. But we will be back next week to check in on the ceasefire and see how things are going. Hopefully they have held, because I think this war has been bad for pretty much everybody, honestly, but worse for some than others. But for this week, at least, this has been another episode of Global Tantrum. Thanks, Galen.
Thanks, man.